Hello, everyone. Today, my guest on my podcast is a very experienced expert on natural language processing, Elsa Sklavounou. Hello, Elsa. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Elsa is representing also a company that I am cooperating with, I'm partnering with in their solution, RWS, which is a leading provider of services and products in the area of translation, professional translation, including natural language processing based products. And the motto of RWS is to unlock global understanding. So Elsa, how does NLP unlocks global understanding between people?
It starts very well, in fact, how natural language processing unlocks global understanding. What is very interesting in the natural language processing compound noun, it is that we are talking about natural language and processing. We don't talk about language processing, we are talking natural language processing, which is driving me automatically to your first question about what is the history of natural language processing.
Right, because this is quite an old topic, to be honest, like
exactly
1960s. It's
even before, you will be amazed to see that the first attempt to relate words between languages is dated to the 17th century, where when philosophers like Leibniz and Descartes was trying to consider natural languages a communication code.
right.
So that means that we do start under this philosophical aspect of language. No, the philosophical concept of language like communication code. So automatically, indeed, we had this first let's say, theoretical backbone of considering natural language as a communication code, and the word processing that allows, in a certain way, start thinking how we can establish a relationship between words in different languages. And then you have a first very important milestone with Turing that put in place this possibility to unlock the global understanding with his Enigma machine.
Right.
Enigma is a Greek word that means something which is obscure, something which is said in an obscure way, that you cannot understand it quickly. You cannot understand it at all. So automatically, something which is hidden or something which is said obscurely brings you in the cryptography, which is I hide something, I write something hidden, right? So what is very automatically, we start with the 17th century with Leibniz and Descartes, and we land with the first processing machine, Enigma, which is used in order to decode obscure messages in languages that we might not understand. So the first main role of natural language processing is to recognize, to be able to recognize, and then it is able to process real time through any type of tool. The relationship in between the decoding, encoding, and cryptography is the one that was primarily used in defense, okay? 41, 43 in order to be able to understand what the different armies have been communicating. And as many of the innovations, everything started with the defense. Now, from a more theoretical linguistic framework, we understand that when we have a first machine that attempts to decode and with success after all, it gave let's say, the application framework for any type of linguistic theory to start creating typologies in order to be able to formalize the linguistic sign and to move it through the different technological advances that we are going to cover, from the linguistic sign to the linguistic signal. And we can cover that later in our discussion.
That's absolutely fascinating. Just to realize, let's say, that the modern NLP dates back to decoding the Enigma machine. Actually, the Enigma machine, which was also the code name of a German tool, right, for communication over U-boats, for instance, was first cracked right before the war in my city of Warsaw by a group of 3 mathematicians. And without them, I think Alan Turing wouldn't have cracked it. But having said all that, let's say NLP gained momentum some 10 years ago. Would you agree? To a large scale?
No, I believe it's much older. In fact, it's much older because we need not to forget all the attempts and for instance, it is the NLP started to evolve from the moment that computers were able to compile knowledge outside the written text. The reason why, or audio, the reason why I'm talking about knowledge is because there are many linguistic theories that can be applied to natural language processing. You might have sociolinguistics, psycholinguistics, cognitive science, semantics, that they are all the theories all over the world. They have been trying to see how we can create typologies of things that we compile in our human brain, but need in a certain way be represented for the understanding through a machine. So the very interesting piece is that you talked about the Enigma machine, and at that time it was an oral, it was a communication through code, right?
Right.
It was like a telegraph. So you didn't have a written linguistic science as such, but it was a cryptographed message that has been recognized to a natural language. And all those theories are trying to formalize within the history and within the progress in the computer science how language can be represented at different layers. And once the recognition of this is happening by decoding at one level, that means in a single language, how this can be transferred to other languages. And when we started this Leibniz and Descartes approach of how we relate words between languages, we started to develop the first rule-based systems in order to establish transfer rules in between languages related all the formalized knowledge through the language and the natural language processing.
Right.
There were attempts. Yes, please.
No. It's please go on.
In fact, we see that, for instance, Language Weaver, which is the machine translation system that is the technology and brand of RWS. In fact, if you see it, it started as a decoding machine. In fact, it started, the baseline was in a certain way, Warren Weaver, who proposed the idea of using computers in order to decode and decrypt language in 1947. So you see that after the Turing machine, there is Warren Weaver that comes, proposed the idea of using computers to decode and decrypt. And we are starting bringing the machines in the game of the natural language processing.
I'm just,
because after all the machine is happening through automation, right?
Right.
And we had, of course, there were some theoretical frameworks. I'm taking more Zelig-Harris than Chomsky about the universal grammar. The reason why is also related to what we are seeing happening right now. Yes, we can establish a universal grammar, but how we can leverage the specificities and the particularities of each language. I had the chance to work with Maurice Gross in my PhD, where he developed more different methods in language syntax that allows in a certain way to weave manually vectors by tracking the acceptabilities in a sentence. What was very interesting at that period, and I will stick more in this in his lexicon grammar theory, was that we have been working on subsets of knowledge. That means exactly how the brain is getting educated through the school. You go to the elementary school, and then you follow your cursus, and once you finish your university, you are going to be expert in something. I cannot talk about how to manufacture a car or how to send the Falcon 9 in details in the moon or in Mars. What I can say is my experience related to linguistics, to applied linguistics. And we have this discussion. So with lexicon grammar, with all the teams all over the world, we have been codifying acceptabilities in lexicon and syntax and grammar in given fields. The reason is that you don't have only one language. In fact, we have as many languages as knowledges. For instance, you can have a knowledge of electronics. The English language that you are going to speak in electronics is completely different than the English language that is being used in medicine, in law, in finance, in
this is a great
life.
point. This is a great point.
In SMS. So we are trying in a certain way to create finite subsets of knowledge in order to exhaustively track the acceptabilities that now are what we are calling vectors in attention-based models that we are generating through machine learning techniques.
What I was getting at that, let's say for the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, this explosion of data connected with Web 2.0, I think it really changed the game in natural language processing, because
in fact,
because of the amount of it. That it was said that, let's say, for the first 10 years of the 21st century, we created as much data as humanity as ever before. And the second issue I would like to ask you about your opinion, the cloud revolution in technology, so much more computing power available for even for researchers, which was once reserved probably not for science but only for large enterprises, is now available for everyone in theory. So did it also change the game in the NLP area? These two trends?
In fact, what is very interesting is to associate the creation of data, the evolution of the computer science in terms of machines performance, and the accumulation of data that happens real time all over the world thanks to the internet. So the thing is that from the moment a device which is called computer is born, and from the moment people went from typing machines to a word processing solution, you start not only printing paper with content, with documents, but also you start creating data. The data are represented then digitally. That means that the accumulation of documents that are being produced cannot be printed, and it's not safe. Imagine that a company loses all the legacy, all the document legacy in a fire. And if the automation was not there, you understand that the impact of this would have been major. Of course, we wanted the machines to start being performant. For if you see, for instance, the central units that have been used in the early 50s in order to create the first machine translation system, for instance, which was based on rules, you're going to see that it's almost, I don't know how many rooms of central processing units. And now you do have it in a tiny device. The power of the computing power that will allow you to process a lot of data. So I believe that it is a parallel activity about the maturity of the natural language or the applied linguistics to natural language processing. There are all the theories in the world with all the different models that they gave some particular, they gave particular insights on what language is in different contexts, in different domain, with some additional evolution that we're going to cover later on the intention, the judgment, the common sense, and the behavioral aspect of human beings that are interacting together through natural language, or even technical language. You see now that, for instance, you can compile and you can transform into text codified languages that are being used by people that have some difficulty in expressing themselves in natural language processing or in reading.
Yes, I read the other day, for instance, because it's we're talking about the origins, about the philosophical concept behind it, which is fascinating, but it like really moves so far in practical use.
Exactly, and if I may say, we had a fantastic webinar with SiteImprove, which is a partner of RWS, about the digital inclusivity and the content speed, which is exactly what we are currently discussing, how language allows an application, a device, to include all the type of not all the type, it's not an inclusive language to say all the type, all the users all over the world in a content speed that will allow the user to consume content for any of his purpose. It can be educational, it can be commercial, it can be contributive in a very fast way. I learned, for instance, from this interaction, this thought leadership discussion that we had, that, for instance, you cannot wait more than 5 seconds. 12 seconds, you have already make the user go somewhere else in order to consume content. So what is very interesting on this is that the creator of the content is also somewhere else consumer. Now the cloud, as you said, facilitates a lot the access, the processing, the storage. Why? Because you can benefit from robust infrastructures, IT infrastructures that will allow to centralize safely the data as a corporate legacy. Now, how the data are getting transformed to information, to documents, and to files through knowledge is another question.
Right. How does machine learning help in all this? And let's say my next point is, the question would be, let's say, could you tell us more about what is GPT-3, which is a hot topic about language processing today?
In fact, it became a hot topic, but it was a real attempt of a concept, an experimental concept, to see how it looks like to browse all the web of the world in all the languages, in all the domains, and start representing languages to be recognized and to be reproduced. What I think about it is that as an experiment, as a concept, it is fantastic. It brings us to the new way of compiling data through graphical process units, which is something extremely interesting. Why? Because in my opinion, you don't use anymore the space as a separator, but you go deeper in the word. I would even say that the alphabet is just an association of pixels that can be read from a graphical process unit in order to expand the diversity and trigger the most accurate vectors for the attention-based mechanism. The problem is what we said afterwards. I cannot have this discussion with you if I didn't have the PhD with Maurice and my 22 years in the industry. So you understand that automatically the knowledge that I represent discussing with you for this podcast is completely, let's say, defined by some keywords, some knowledge about the topics that you put in your questions. So by reading your questions, automatically my brain starts associating vectors in order to talk about linguistics. If you ask me now, with the generic language that I have, to talk about something extremely specialized, like, for instance, Starlink. What is the mechanism of Starlink in allowing internet connections from anywhere? I cannot tell you. I will definitely cannot tell you unless I go to my web browser. I'm going to type some keywords that I will see relevant, and automatically I'm going to read what I see, but it's not my knowledge. So that's exactly what happens with GTP3. He has this capacity of recognizing everything, but he cannot. GTP3, I don't know why I say he cannot or she cannot.
Yes,
it's interesting. It's like a humanized technology. Yes, I humanize already technology, which is a very interesting lapsus in a way that after all, you gain this type of performance that you almost humanize technology, which is great because we see, for instance, that all the virtual agents have names like humans, right? That brings you in the robotics, in the communication with robots, with machine, which is one other aspect of the natural language processing, is how humans can communicate with machines. The machine can be an application, but can be also an Android, right? The thing is that you have this highly first level of global understanding with this attempt, but at the same time, you cannot go deeper to a knowledge that will allow you to conclude to a judgment or take a decision. So that is the reason why I believe we need to represent semantically the data that will allow to extract some knowledge graphs that can take into account many aspects of the content as context that can be also situational, not only written text that is going back and forth in different applications.
Yes.
Now thinking loudly again, the situation and aspect of the context is also the one that is going to lead us to the behavioral aspect of human representations. And we are entering to the discussion of the spatial computing, the metaverse, the extended reality, the virtual reality, the augmented reality. So all this is starting from the way you expose the natural language processing, supported by the technological evolution and performance, and at the same time, the possibility to run experimental approaches in order to see how you get closer to the human brain. Not how you replace human brain, but how you get closer in a way that you bring automation in aspects that are in tasks that are repetitive, and you leave the beauty of the human brain in his or her or its creativity.
I absolutely agree.
Exactly.
Sorry for interrupting, but I must say that I recently started to use an AI tool. I won't tell which one. that is helping you to write. And after I've been using this, I think, for a week or so far, but I see that, let's say, the creation is always mine, and the tool just does this all mundane things like thinking out sentences and so on and so forth. And I think that in the context of social media or writing corporate communication or everyday things, it's a great helper. The funny thing is that also 2 days ago, I realized that a friend of mine from high school quit his corporate job and decided to become a fantasy writer. And he published his first book some days ago.
Yeah.
And I called him only yesterday to congratulate, because it was really something great to me. And I asked him, did he use any AI helper? And he said no, because writing literature is all about all these soft touches of the language. Every character especially in a fantasy book, like, I don't know, kind of relate.
Sharing this experience, it's exactly what also I wanted to ask. It is what kind of writer you are, right? If you are a writer of everyday, for instance, I love LinkedIn, I love social media, because it gives exactly the liberty, the freedom for all the persons to be creative and give their own view of what is happening in the world, no matter what this is. Okay, of course, there are, and now we are entering in the behavioral aspect and the ethical aspect of language, that you see it's not getting applied only to machines, it's getting applied also to ourselves, because after all, language is is a tool. There is Wittgenstein that was talking about how language is a tool. It's like a software. It's like a code. So you cannot allow yourself to be able to use a tool in a way that might hurt or might create an inconsistency to someone else. So what is very interesting on that is, afterwards, if you are a literary writer, all right, and we have seen attempts that an AI can rewrite a very interesting book that is similar to a human writer, but automatically it's not, if you want, it's not the objective. Again, it is an experimental process of measuring what is the progress that has been made, what are the techniques that are being used, and what are the results we are obtaining. But when you are entering in a technical content writer, where a subject matter expertise is there, when you have a standardized language, standardized grammar, standardized vocabulary, this is the space where machine learning models can be a great help to a corporate that would like to have relevant data representing the company's principles. A content that needs to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. That is the way you are going to retrieve from the huge amount of content that a corporate is being using, something that will be transformed to an information or to a knowledge, depending on the consumption of the content. And in this case, yes, you need tools in order to standardize exactly like you use machinery in a manufacturing company. We are not going to put a human hand to sculpt all the spare parts of a car. Why? Because it's not a production supply chain. It is just the well-known or fantastic handmade approach. But the handmade approach cannot have this precision of the standardization of the machine itself as a first matter. I don't know, matière première, the raw material. The raw material, you give it to a machinery and it produces cars, planes, rockets, satellites. This type of standardization consistency check for safety and security reasons needs to be followed also to the content. Why? Because it jeopardizes companies' corporate reputation. So this is the way where you are going to automate, and this is the place where machine learning models can transform the data to information, to knowledge, and to content that is going to be consumed within the corporate or within the end users of the content. We talk about consumption because this is the way we measure the accessibility to the content. But after all, there are the content destinations where the content is going to be, is going to land, being sure that it complies with all the regulations depending on the industry, and there are much regulations, more and more, many regulations, more and more regulations that are in a certain way ruling the content production. You have seen, for instance, there is this concept of the borderless data. How this borderless data was born is because you want to assign borders in the data. You want to be sure what is the ethical, unethical, what is the medicine, what is the legal, what is the FSI, in order to provide compliant to the regulation content.
Right. It's just like,
so we don't lose our creativity, but when we write technical documents and corporate content, we need to be compliant to standards. So from the moment we standardize, we apply an automated solution as a helper and as a protector, because we can trace and we can bring surveillance to the content that we produce.
that's just another very interesting topic that we agreed to cover, is like, would ever more powerful natural language processing supported by AI, or I know I'm mingling these two issues, but let's say now it's that this two concepts are very much interwound, would work the same way in let's say written word, books, magazines, kind of content than it works in the movie industry. People, let's say most of us have Netflix, and people complain more and more that the plots of Netflix's movies and series are in fact very much created by AI today. So it's producing, let's say, one taste the world over for the entertainment we consume, but it also, you know, directs us all in the same direction, which is something quite creepy to me. And suppose the same happens with the written word. So will AI written books or AI written content redirect, let's say, our thinking, our civilization, our politics?
You know, it's very interesting, this discussion, and I know that we are recorded, but I can tell you that it's extremely creative thinking right now. In fact, you talked about the movie providers, and we have also any other type of media providers. Okay, for instance, I'm a huge fan of a music provider that I'm hearing 24/7 if I need, because I can sing a song in the morning, and afterwards, after this song that I sing, I have similar to my song other songs of undiscovered artists. And this undiscovered artist goes again to this hidden approach of Leibniz and Descartes about how we discover what is behind a signal. This signal can be a movie, this signal can be a song, this signal can be an audio file, this signal can be any type of text using linguistic signals. Now, what is very interesting to what you say is that, and again, it goes to the content consumption, is that you have more and more users as consumers. That means that you have more users. That brings diversity in the taste of what they are going to expect from any type of media provider to propose. And at the same time, you have media production, right? You have songwriters, you have movie writers, you have directors. What is, after all, the authenticity in the creation itself, first of all?
That's a good question.
Level of the, yes, depending on the level of the authenticity in the creation, you have also the performance in the proposal of something to be consumed. The problem is that, and this is a human, if I say characteristic, the human characteristic is that humans can be authentic in low scale.
Yeah.
When you are talking about large scale, we are entering into the production where a human is not a machine to produce 500 pieces of the same spare part in 2 seconds. That applies to movies, that applies to songwriters, that applies to everything. Now, what is very interesting is that let's support all aspects of human production, the authentic or the non-authentic one, or the repetitive one. How then you are able to build an AI system that retrieves only the authentic piece of media or of text or of any type of human production that a corporate considers as a legacy representing the corporate reputation and standards in order to be consumed. So as the end, the destination, if you want, meet the expectations. And here where it is becoming interesting, because we are starting in a certain way to enter more in the subject matter expertise and how we represent subject matter expertise. The subject matter expertise is defined by the knowledge. So the idea is how you represent knowledge in all that. And you have more and more researches that are oriented to metadata, to annotations of all those data that are accurate and authentic, representing the subject matter expertise. Now, the very interesting piece of metadata is that, after all, you can generate knowledge outside the content that had been annotated and represented through knowledge graphs and also represented to machine learning models. So I believe this is where we are going in the capability of generating or representing the knowledge through metadata in order to retrieve relevant content, meeting the findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability standards.
It's like I cannot operate scientific language such as you.
This is very interesting also as a statement. You see, that's exactly the GPT-3. In fact, you say, Elsa, I cannot use this scientific language. I'm not that much using this scientific language because, after all, I'm just somebody who did the journey of applied linguistics since 18 years old, or even before, because I loved in the school syntax. But you see that those are the boundaries in between the general concept and the subject matter expert.
Yes, but what I wanted to say is that there is much said about AI, you know, blocking our free will, so to say, as a philosophical concept. But after this discussion, I have much more positive attitude towards AI-generated content, because I see that it's more like, from what I'm getting from what you're saying, is that rather helps us to better understand ourselves and, you know, to develop ourselves further than, let's say, losing our free will.
In fact, what is very interesting is that AI is a mirror of ourself, but a mirror, not a representation of our brain, not a representation of our social behavior, not a representation of our social attitude, not a representation of our judgments, our ethical standards, our particularities in between the civilizations and cultures. You can always represent something, but not itself, herself, himself. In fact, it is like a simulation of what would have happened if, but it's not a replacement, it's a simulation. In some technical aspects, the results are impressive. For instance, see the progress in robotics running tiny chirurgical operations. See the progress that you have in the self-driving with a driver on board. There are some new experiments on a driverless car. The idea is how cautious and meeting the standards that we have been talking is that this type of standardization, in order to bring to the market those kind of products, you understand that they cannot be without automation and technology, and they cannot be outside the experience coming out from the diversity of experiments that have been driven for many, many years in order to compile the knowledge outside the experiments. For me, now that I'm thinking loudly, AI, it is a fantastic compiler of knowledge of experiments, where they can bring very quickly results, showing methods, and eventually reproduce the actions in order to get exactly the same result as a mirror of ourselves.
Yes, indeed. So how would, let's say, let's now come back, let's say, very much down to earth. In let's say, in the very context of translation, how does it look at your company, RWS, with translation? Will, let's say, manual translation die, or how it will compile with automation in this very area? Could you please tell us more about it?
In fact, the translation is a very interesting field of linguistics. I don't believe that the manual translation is dying. In fact, the manual translation now, it is reinvented and getting transformed to localization and to authoring. If you think all the expertise, all the expert translators that are around the world, they are subject matter experts, first of all, and they author when they translate. Now, when we are talking about specialized translations and we bring the market view of your statement that says our human translators are going to die, it's not because they are going to die, it's because they are not going to earn their life by doing what they do, right? So, and this is because you brought exactly the level of automation with a quality that repeats what it is to be repeated and leaves the creative to what it's going to be created. And this is the definition also of the authenticity that we have been discussing previously. So that would mean it is exactly what you have seen with other spaces of the industry when you don't have anymore the same way you take a photo. You can take a fantastic photo now with your mobile device. And you don't need to have, I don't know, 100 lenses in order to take a fantastic photo for yourself, unless you are a professional photographer, and then you create art. And the definition of art is partly related to technology, because after all, it is something genuine that a human being can produce, being authentic. And from the moment we are going to talk about production and authenticity, automatically we are talking about authoring and we are talking about localization. So specialized translation as a market concept, it is now reinvented to subject matter expertise, localization, and authoring. For this, if I may, and sorry to interrupt, this is also the end-to-end mechanism that unlocks the global understanding at RWS.
Right.
Why? Because there are solutions that, content technology solutions that allows companies, corporates to create relevant content, no matter if it is web content or component content, then it's going through the subject matter expertise that can be the corporate authors or the subject matter experts that we have in 85 countries in all the languages of 120 languages, I don't know in how many combinations. And this will allow afterwards to validate the localization process, and not only validate the localization process, but also align it to the content consumption based on the digital experience that each of us have every day with the content. So what is very interesting also in it is that in this intelligent content supply chain with the human in the loop, you involve all the NLP, natural language processing pieces of technologies that we have been elaborating through our discussion, meaning that you assign knowledge and intelligence to a content through the metadata representation. Then you send more accurate content to the subject matter expert in order to author according to the corporate standards. And then you escalate to the localization, who is going to switch the code of the words in between different languages, depending on the social, cultural, corporate standards that this language is representing. Language is a world where we position far more many things than words. It is a behavioral representation in language, a judgment representation in based on language, and it is something that afterwards is going to lead the digital experience through devices, spatial computing platforms, metaverse, augmented reality, virtual reality, in a way that the knowledge representation is the one that corresponds to our everyday professional life while using language.
Is there awareness among large corporates that there are huge risks not using specialized translation these days?
In fact, I would say that one key word in all this supply chain, in order to answer your question, is the accountability. And this is also, you know, I'm bringing back the AI as a colleague now, okay, not anymore as a technology, but as my colleague of everyday life. And I would say how AI as a colleague can be accountable to what is getting produced. And you do see that automatically, you cannot say that an AI can be accountable. So that would mean that no matter what the level of interaction of artificial intelligence through machine learning models are involved in the localization process, in the authoring process, you just need somebody to be accountable for the results. And this is the subject matter expert, this is the quality validator, this is the quality auditor, this is the data compliance officer, this is the chief information officer. You see that it is because you have this AI, the huge volume of data, that there are some new market positions that are opened. You are working in the hiring process also as a partner of many corporates. You know now that people are talking about data curators, people are talking about information officers, people are talking about data compliance officers. And all that is because the borderless approach of data needs to be regulated, and the public institutions that in a certain way monitor this digital currency of data, they want to be sure that they meet the regulations exactly like a medicine, exactly like a device, exactly like a toy, exactly like any product that is going to be consumed.
Absolutely agree, but my feeling is that the awareness of these problems is not there yet, but it's growing rapidly. from.
In fact, you know, it is a very interesting date. There are some days now, 3 days now, that the in vitro medical device regulation enters into validity. In vitro, nobody knew before in vitro, but once we all been doing COVID tests in order to see if we are ill or not. So there is so much mass production of in vitro medical device that automatically the European Union established a regulation that entered into validity 4 days ago, because they want to be sure that all the production supply chain, the quality assessment and standards is represented by the procedures that need to be followed, the written procedures that need to be followed, so as an in vitro device, an in vitro medical device goes to the market, but not only goes to the market, afterwards needs to be able to be traced, and you need to be able to survey it. So in case the consumer has the minor problem with an in vitro device, he can interact by sending his feedback or her feedback or its feedback. And automatically you will see that something that might be represented in a QR code, and everybody is flashing QR codes now, can give a feedback through this code. So we are always about the language representation or the content representation through a technical language, which is also a way to render all this consumption the most cost-effective in time and money. Right. Why? Because it brings security and safety to the whole world.
Right. Elsa, I think that we could go on for much more, but we have somewhat limited time.
Yes.
So I thank you so much for this discussion. I think it was incredibly creative discussion for me. I learned a lot. I understood a lot. So it's better to say. I would love you to send me over a link to this webinar. I will put it under this podcast. And to all my CTOs, CIOs network, Elsa is an extremely knowledgeable and reliable, accountable partner for all specialized translation issues, which are, and document management issues also. We didn't cover that. In let's say regulated areas, and at least I would give a thought to discuss these fantastic products.
Thank you so much, and I'm very happy that we tried to unlock the global understanding of NLP, machine learning, and AI throughout. Since we did some shortcuts, but it was very interesting for me also to think around the questions that you had. Thank you so much.
Okay, have a very great day, Elsa.
Thank you. Looking forward.